Hey, everybody. Leigh Steinberg is known for many things. As the world's first super agent, he served as an inspiration behind the character Jerry McGuire. He's represented the best of the best in the NFL and built up the biggest sports agency business in professional sports. But after some bad business deals, some agent and player defections, and a public battle with alcohol abuse, Steinberg lost it all. But instead of staying down and out, he built back his life and his business and now represents one of the biggest names in sports in Mr. Patrick Mahomes. Based in LA, Steinberg's life has played out like a Hollywood script filled with drama. And he's determined today to help others learn from his wins and his losses. I'm grateful today for our time with a man who has seen it all, Mr. Leigh Steinberg. So you're in Newport. You're in your office in Newport.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and now have you lived in California your whole life?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
And
how do you?
my only split, I grew up in Los Angeles. I went
Yeah,
to school in Berkeley, undergrad and law school, and then I split time between both places. But for the last 40 years, I've had a home in Newport Beach.
yeah. How do you think being based in LA area played into your career?
And the fact that UCLA and SC were massive uh, producers of top football talent, baseball talent, basketball talent had a huge role.
Yeah, yeah. That makes sense. Um, so the show's called Pay Your Dues. I'd love to dive into your early history because I think there's so much to be gleaned from that and your time, at Cal, and even before that, in your book, which I read, The Agent, it's very entertaining. You talk about your grandfather and the club that he ran, and you had some exposure to celebrities at an early age. And how impactful was that for you?
Hugely, because you'd have to be a little older to remember these names, but my grandfather ran Hillcrest Country Club, which was the hangout for a bunch of comedians. And it was Groucho Marx, George Burns, Jack Benny, um, uh, and I would sit on my grandpa's lap and listen to George Burns, and my grandfather took me to my first baseball game.
Wow.
And we still have a picture somewhere of me sitting on Marilyn Monroe's lap. And I got an Elvis Presley autographed guitar. So it planted the entertainment focus early.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you end up at UCLA and then Cal Berkeley and law school there. And I think in reading your book, your involvement as a student body president in Cal, you were very involved and you didn't know you were going to become a negotiator, but it feels like those experiences really paid off later in life.
Absolutely. I learned more in student politics because the war in Vietnam was going on, and we were continually demonstrating against it. Well, the governor of California was Ronald Reagan,
Mhm.
and he kept cracking down. So I had some interesting interactions. I learned everything I later needed to learn about the art of negotiating from interacting with Ronald Reagan, who later became president.
Yeah, that's and then you later met him at the White House, right? You had that comes full circle.
We laughed then; it wasn't too funny at the 70s.
You also had I mean, there was a lot of social, right? A lot of social and political things going on while you're at Cal, and in your book, you talk about Jim Morrison and Jimi Hendrix coming through there. I mean, these are all interactions that you had that I'm sure you realize that not most people don't have those types of things. It's very unique.
Um, Everybody wanted to experience Berkeley, the vortex of student life with longer hair and different dress and
Mhm.
alternative herbal substances and
Mhm.
rock music. And so Jimi Hendrix and Jim Morrison at different times came to see me, and like Jimi Hendrix said, I want to know what the vibe is here. So I toured him around Berkeley, and so I did the same with Jim Morrison, and then people like Gloria Steinem were I showed around, and so it felt like being in the concentric middle of civilization, and certainly was the center of student life.
Yeah, yeah, and Steve Bartkowski, quarterback at Cal, you get to know him. You're finishing up law school. He asked you to become his agent. You weren't planning on doing that. And did you did you resist that at all, or did you just have the mentality of, yeah, I can do it. Let's go for it.
So I was a dorm counselor in an undergrad dorm. So, and they moved the freshman football team into the dorm, and one of the students ended up, Steve Bartkowski, being the first pick in the 1975 draft. I was probably going to go to work for the Alameda County DA, but I had traveled the world for a year. And so in early 1975, I hadn't accepted that position yet. And Bartkowski asked me to represent him. So there I was, brimming with legal experience, but I did understand leverage. And there was a competitive football league, the World Football League, that would have loved to have a big blue-eyed blonde, strong-arm quarterback, and
Mhm.
so we had some leverage. But I still didn't know that this would be a career. There really wasn't organized sports agentry then, Greg. It was a team could slam the phone down and say, "We don't deal with agents." So it was very rudimentary compared to what's morphed and developed over time. And so, but my father had raised me with these two core values. One was treasure relationships, especially family. And the second was try to make a meaningful difference in the world and help people and cure pain and help people who can't help themselves. So I saw in that first experience the veneration and idol worship that athletes were held in communities across the country. They were the movie stars. And I thought, you
Mhm.
know what? If I had them go back and retrace their roots back to the high school community and set up a scholarship fund or work with a church or Boys and Girls Club, and at the collegiate level, uh, come back into that community of alums. And at the pro level, pick a specific cause they'd like to tackle and put together a charitable foundation with the leading business figures, political figures, and community leaders that I could probably make more impact uh, through the fact that they're high profile, triggered imitative behavior than something else. So that's really what attracted me to it. Of course, I love sports, but
Yeah. Did that set you out along your career? Because that's very consistent throughout your career and the players you've represented. That community involvement. I mean, maybe it doesn't I don't know if it resonates with a 21-year-old, all of them, but maybe their parents and other influencers that are helping them make a decision on whether you or the next agent is going to represent them.
so we would try to profile players, and I came with the assumption that there might be 20% of a draft class that would be interested in the type of holistic uh, work that we do, focused on second career, focused on long term health, that would take a special sort of player. So I tried to recruit only those players over time. And so it was much narrower market, um, but it gave self starters and really productive and players on and off the field.
Yeah. So I think what's interesting about your career is you get this. great opportunity. Your first client is the first pick in the NFL draft that particular year, but it wasn't, a windfall necessarily for you. And I think it's interesting that you talk about in your book, I mean, you would later go to the East West Shrine game and you slept in your car for a few nights because money was tight. Can you talk about how it was how it was getting that business going early on?
So the approach I just walked you through in terms of role modeling and targeting, I didn't have uh, when I started. Um, but I realized after a year or two of talking to many, many players that there were only going to be a finite group that would be interested. So I had to remodel my approach, and I would research if someone went and on a mission to Haiti, or they worked with inner city kids. I would try to research them and their parents and understand that that's someone that would be a values match for me.
So, what was it like getting those first? How long did it take to get those first few clients and really feel like you started to get a business going with a handful of clients?
Well, I immediately the first year signed Dave Hampton, who was a all-pro running back for the Falcons, and then in the 1977 draft, I had a first rounder, and then it just took off from there. And so in 1978, I had several first rounders and second
Mhm.
rounders, and so it grew quickly from there.
And what was it like as an agent? This is, I also can remember a time before cell phones, before the internet. I would wait to Monday morning to get the paper to see the stats of all my favorite players. I mean, what was it like for you keeping track of your clientele or prospects when we didn't have the information like we do today?
So my office was in my parents' card room, and your younger listeners won't remember this, but if you were on the phone and someone else called, it rang busy. And
Yeah.
so I was my own secretary. I answered the phone. I typed my own letters on a typewriter. We would go to Kinko's Copies to copy things. Um, there were no cell phones, so you needed to have a calling card number to use a payphone. And so it was a completely different environment. If Rip Van Winkle had gone to sleep when I started and awoke today, he'd be in complete culture shock.
Yeah. Yeah. What what was it like as a young man trying to convince other young men and their parents to trust you with their careers? That had to be that there had to be some resistance at times.
Well, I looked so young. I was young. I was
Yeah.
25 or 26 when I
Yeah.
started, and I didn't look that. So that that always was. Unfortunately, I had the experience of having done the biggest contract of all time. But what a the key skill in all of this is listening. It's being able to draw out another human being by creating an atmosphere of trust around them so they feel free to peel back the layers of the onion and go deeper and deeper into their deepest anxieties and fears and their greatest hopes and dreams. If you can put yourself in another person's heart and mind and see the world the way they see it, so that was the key. It was having relationships at a much more granular level, um, because men don't share quite as easily. I'm sure some of your female listeners will identify with this as
Mhm.
women do. And so it was a process of gradually drawing them out, but emotionally bonding at a deep level. And that was skill that I've had. Um, much earlier to be involved in student politics.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very much a relationship business, right? I mean, there's trust, there's relationships with the players, and I would think with the executives that you know over time and you're negotiating with. So it's all about relationships and maintaining those. I'm sure. Yeah.
In repetitive business. So
Yeah.
that it became clear that if you could craft win-win scenarios that took into account the needs of someone in management or with a franchise and fulfill their dreams while crafting a creative way to have both parties walk away happy, you would deal with that same person repetitively over and over again over the years. So it was a cautionary note not to take advantage of the position, because the only thing I know for sure is if someone has their neck exposed to you and the temptation is to step on it, the
Mhm.
only sure thing is that your neck will be exposed at some point, and you better establish a paradigm of cooperation.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you what style of negotiator you are because there's different kinds, right? There's the grinder, there's the mediator, and so you've kind of got to you walk that thin line of getting what you want without alienating someone.
So I'm a concept negotiator. In a sports negotiation, unless you're in baseball arbitration, there's no judge, there's no arbitrator. So the question is whose reality of what's relevant and compelling in this situation will govern. So it's my job to be able to present a player in a way and the market in a way where it logically leads to a certain level of compensation. And so it's not about nickel and diming. It's not about back and forth, back and forth. If I'm successful in conveying a way of looking at this, then hopefully the proposal makes more sense. But the thing you don't want to do is say, I want money because I want money.
Uh-huh. And then also navigating it through the media, right? I mean, I'm sure that's a skill to be learned on how you navigate the media on behalf of your client or how you make a team look.
Well, you learn very early that the best negotiations are done behind the scenes, and the first public exposure is uh, happy athletes sitting at a press conference, because you can either have power in the world or you can brag about it. And if you brag about it and brag about deals and all the rest of it, you're humiliating the other side.
Yeah.
So the best way to get, I always laugh when I see players demanding to be traded publicly. The best
Mhm.
thing for them is to have behind the scenes discussions with executives, um, and see if you can work something out. The minute you put someone's back up against the wall and publicly challenge them, you're creating a conflict that leads to deadlock. And we can't afford deadlock with athletes with finite playing careers.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, and that's part of the leverage you talk about and how you use that. You also seem like you're very research was a big part of your negotiations, right? Like you would research the team's position economically, and I mean, I guess power, yeah, or knowledge is power, right? So research was a big part of what you do.
Again, you want to put yourself in the other person's heart and mind. So you need to understand what their economic situation is, where the profitability comes from. In modern days, master capology and caponomics so that you uh, come up with a solution that maximizes compensation to a player, but still allows them to build a team around them because of cap limitations. So it's uh, again, my goal always is can I figure out what the most critical needs are of a team, and then uh, craft a proposal around a way that creates a win-win.
So, as your business is growing, you're now representing dozens of clients. You have people working for you, working with you, you have partners. How did you manage all that volume? I mean, the massive communications with your players and teams, it would seem overwhelming at times.
So, at this particular moment, I don't know what time it is. I'm vaguely aware of where I am. All I'm listening to is the sound of your voice. So by putting all of your focus and attention to each moment, each meeting, each phone call, you get the most out of it. So today people are so distracted with cell phones and tweeting and texting and the rest of it. Um, I'm focused on this moment. And so by doing that, you can master a fair amount of breadth or width in terms of the number of projects you have going.
Mhm. How did the scope of what you do for players change as the industry blew up? Obviously, commercialization, pre-draft workouts, right? I mean, the scouting combine's such a big deal now. Your role and the services you provided, it would seem like that really grew over time.
Well, first of all, you have to master the scouting system because um, players started to train for the draft in a given location. They would have all-star games. They would go to a scouting combine. You needed to be able to sketch out the path to the draft. Second of all, there were major changes in terms of caps, revenue splits, and you needed to be on top of all of that. And tell a young player what the best path to the draft was. When I began in 1975, the two teams that came in the next year were Seattle and Tampa Bay, and they had a valuation price of $16.5 million. Each team made $2 million as a share of the national television contract. Those figures all exploded. And so it was a matter of understanding where the revenue was coming from, that TV networks would look at sports rights fees as loss leader bidding. What they really wanted was to show promos for their Monday through Friday programming um, during Sunday afternoon or during sports events. And so the economics are not totally rational. They're loss leader economics. And so we've just had an explosion. And then you had to see the stadium revolution come where you'd have stadia with luxury boxes and premier seating and all these ancillary revenue streams. So naming rights and jumbo scoreboards. And then you had to track the growth of things like fantasy sports. So 48 people now play fantasy football, and recently the introduction of gambling into the mix. Um, so have to be flexible to understand how this world has changed. And then you have players with shorter attention spans because they're part of that generation. So maybe I used to spend 2 hours talking to a player, and maybe today I'll spend a half hour.
Hmm. And at times you have high profile clients playing against each other. I mean, you represented Troy Aikman and Steve Young and some epic battles. But what is that like for you as kind of the man in the middle?
So I have individual relationships with each of those players. And the fact that they play against each other, it was sort of fun. Like when Dallas is playing Pittsburgh and I'm representing um, every quarterback on both teams' rosters. So it only gets tricky when Bruce Smith, the all-time sack leader, sacks my client who's a quarterback,
Yes.
or Tim McDonald or Carnell Lake or Kenny Easley picks off.
Yes.
But I'm not part of that process. The games are going to play themselves out.
Yeah. I think something that speaks to the relationships you talked about is your relationship with Warren Moon, and the fact that you presented him at introduced him at the when he was inducted into the Hall of Fame. That's not typical, I think, for an agent to do that. What does that say about the relationship that you had years after he finished playing? And we're fans of Warren Moon around. I'm in Seattle, right? So we're fans of Warren Moon around here.
So remember that when Warren came into football, there was a great deal of prejudice and doubt as to
Hmm.
whether African American quarterback could play the position in the NFL. So he went to Canada for 6 years. So he played 6 years in Canada and 17 in the NFL. He played
Hmm.
23 years. So basically, we sort of grew up together,
Yeah.
and it was a really good friendship. There were times where he gave me advice, and those relationships have a lot of caring and a lot of love.
Yeah. Yeah. And he wrote the forward to your book, which was very very special as well. Um, you're I'd say less flashy than maybe some agents out there. Did that work to your advantage, would you say? I mean, you're a very public person, of course, but I think you're different than what people would stereotype as an agent. Would you agree with that?
Um, it it's just that it's a stereotype.
Yeah.
Um, but I grew up in Southern California, went to school in Northern California. I mean, we always dressed casually. Um, I was never obsessed with the type of car I drove. Um, I tried to keep my focus on my dad's two core values. So it, um, I never had any problem relating to players, and I didn't want to. Uh, yeah, I would not be the person who does a soul handshake with
Yeah.
presumptuously with an African American.
Yeah. Well, you're you. I think you're yourself, right? I think people see that and appreciate that. How much work do you do, or has it changed with players with their mental side of the game, right? Whether it's in season or off season, that's such a key part of our lives, and particularly a professional athlete.
So the critical delineation point is in adversity because it will happen. So the quarterback's thrown a couple interceptions, the crowd is booing, the game's getting out of hand. At that moment in adversity, can that player compartmentalize, tune out distractions, adopt a quiet mind, and elevate their level of play to bring a team to victory? It's about critical moments. So the bright player does tremendous preparation. The old concept of the off season, there really isn't much of an off season. People are studying a playbook, they're studying all the rest of it. I always have what I stress to players: stay in process. Don't be obsessed with the ultimate result. Just keep taking the steps you need that you know will ultimately lead you to better performance. And not don't get out of this moment. Focus, and that'll give you the most productivity.
How hard is it to have a discussion with a player that maybe their time's up. Maybe the career is up. You know, the team is ready to move on, and maybe the player's not ready to move on. That's a hard pill to swallow. I would suspect.
That's excruciating as a discussion because I've rarely ever met a player who voluntarily walked away from a sports career. They're too old, they may not be talented, they may be injured, they have a concept of what they should be paid that's at variance with the market. But players want to play. It's all they've known. They've been structured since Pop Warner and Little League. They have structure. They have the support of people in the locker room. They have the electric uh, stimulation of competition. They don't want to quit. And then people will say, well, what about this player who walked off into the sunset? And I'd always respond, well, you weren't their agent. You didn't know that. 3 games into their retirement season, they called me up and said, you think you could get me another team? Uh, Players don't want to quit. And that's why you have to put so much premium on second career preparation,
Hmm.
on having athletes network, on having athletes think about how they can use an off season to prepare for second career. Because if you can, um, whether it's business ownership, whether it's coaching, whether it's media, whatever it is, has to be developed before it's absolutely necessary.
Well, and they don't always have that voice outside of perhaps you, right? I mean, you've had, plenty of clients with parents and Steve Young, and you write about Troy Aikman and their families, but you have, I'm sure, plenty of clients that maybe they don't have a father figure, or they don't have somebody in their ear talking about what life is like after sports.
Well, the very first time someone walks into my office during the recruiting process, I'll ask them, what other skills and talents do you have other than athletics? I mean, do you love media and being a media figure? Do you want to be an executive for a team? Do you want to? So, for example, you mentioned Steve Young. So the 49ers play in Santa Clara. So I would ask him and players like Brent Jones, can you think of any businesses proximate to your training facility that might be interesting to network with? Well, high tech and
Mhm.
venture capital. So I would encourage them to get out and network and meet people. Well, at the end of it, Brent Jones had like a $4 billion hedge fund,
Yeah.
and Steve Young was also head of a hedge fund. And that was based on contacts they had made while they were playing.
Yeah. Valuable advice for sure. Um, so we talked about player adversity. You've been very open about your own adversity, and I appreciate that, and your struggles with alcohol. And many of us have had family members or direct or indirect challenges with that. And I just wonder, when I read your book and you were so open about that, how people responded to you being open about that, right? I mean, what did you find was either from those close to you or even the public's response to you standing up and saying, "Hey, I got to take a step back and get things right here."
Well, let me take that on a couple levels.
Hmm.
No matter what their response was, and it was mostly positive. Um, my whole focus was I've just gone through the experience. I'm now 15 years sober, but plenty of people are out there struggling with addictive substances, and they're confused and they're despondent. How can I help show them the way? How can I use my own circumstance to do some positive good by hopefully giving some inspiration to people still out there? And if anyone listening to this broadcast is struggling or confused with problems with substances, just know there's help. There are 12-step programs and unique fellowships that can, you don't have to do it alone, but if you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, it's still there. And I'm not special. Um, uh, those 12 steps work, and and that's probably, and there is hope.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, your story gives a lot of people hope in many ways. I mean, your story being you were at the top of the mountain, the highest of highs, and you had some agent defections, player defections, and when it all kind of fell apart for you there, I wonder, was it hard for you to trust people again in terms of other agents and things like that?
No, the only thing I can control is my own behavior, and the fact that there were people that claimed to care about role modeling and the rest of it, and at the end only cared about ambition. Um, I just sort of wrote it off and went on. No, I was brought up by a very optimistic, trusting father, and nothing is going to stop me from believing the best in people.
Yeah. Well, that attitude served you well. So you're rebuilding. You take some time off. You're rebuilding your business, and perhaps it was Paxton Lynch, some of those early players that, I mean, you had to prove yourself again. You had to get people to trust you again. So what was that like?
Well, first of all, you have to be brutally honest with yourself about the fact that I don't have a divine right to represent athletes. They reach
Mm,
out to you for their needs. And so, what would a parent care about? Can you tell us that you're guaranteed to never drink again? Um, you didn't do a great job managing your own money. How can you manage ours? Well, I don't. I'm not a financial planner.
mhm,
Um, have you been out of it too long? Do you still have relationships? And all of that. And again, when you walk into someone's front room, it's all fair game. If you don't want them to bring up their fears and concerns, don't walk in. And
mm,
so uh, I was just fine with it. Uh, And the truth of the matter is, in the sports world, people are pretty accepting. There were
mhm.
so many people that had experiences in their own life. And basically, all they said was, congratulations, sobriety.
Mhm. Yeah. And then, it's so interesting that, I mean, it's really like a Hollywood script, that you and your team represent Patrick Mahomes now. What was that pursuit like? You were there on draft night, of course, but before he became who he is today, when did that interview and courtship start with his family?
So it was June of 2016, and met with his family. So many times you meet with the family that is serving as fiduciary protection to the player. And you never meet the player for a long time. And so it was Randy Mahomes and Pat Sr. In the discussion, and we had a values match. They wanted their son to be a role model. They wanted their um, so it was a match, and then didn't really meet Patrick until the season was over. And and again, it was just a values match. And of course, at that point, he was perceived as second or third round draft pick.
Mhm.
But you could just see how uniquely special he was, how smart he was, how focused he was. And Texas Tech had a defense that was so um, porous that they were giving up 50 points a game. So he had to try to score on every different touchdown. Had to score a touchdown on every play. And so it gave people the wrong sense. They didn't know that he was going to adapt very easily to a 3-5-7 step drop. But he showed that at Pro Scouting Day. And, if you like him on the field, you love him off the field because he's grounded and outstanding teammate and philanthropist and parent.
Yeah. Well, we talked about your environment growing up. I mean, his environment around his dad as a professional athlete and his upbringing with his parents, I'm sure has played a huge role in that.
Very helpful because he's so grounded, how not to get too high or too low and to stay in the moment. So that was great education.
Um, you've talked a lot about perspective and how that has guided you along the way. When I bring that up, what do you think about in managing perspective when you face bad news or you face challenges?
It's all about proportionality. I mean, even when I was at the depth of alcohol, I looked and said, you know what? Be real. You're not a starving peasant in Darfur. You don't have the last name Steinberg in Nazi Germany. You don't have cancer. You don't have heart disease. Um, what excuse do you have to not get back and re-engage? So it's all about perspective. Um, I expect there to be problems every day, notwithstanding your best efforts to prevent them. And so that's just a normal part of life. And the key quality is resilience. Life will knock you back, but can you, after you're stunned temporarily, can you rise again and get past it? And we all in our life will have adversity, whether it's substances or marital or romance or economic. And uh, it's almost inevitable that there'll be frustrations and reverses. That's okay. How do you respond? How do you bring new optimism and energy into building more positive things?
Are these the kind of things you're talking to clients about, players about when you find the opportunity, when the opportunity is right? Are these little perspectives you're passing on?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, um, those discussions, of course, are very private, um, but you're trying to do whatever you can to make sure you have the happiest and most productive people around you. And to the extent that you have insights into what might be helpful, um, that's a really positive part of representation.
What do you think is the biggest risk you've taken in your career? Does anything come to mind?
Probably taking a stance on concussion. One very popular, um, when I held the first concussion seminar. I mean, I had a crisis conscience back in the 80s and representing half the starting quarterbacks, and they keep getting hit in the head. And we'd go to doctors and ask how many is too many, what's the magic number? And they had no answers because the brain was the last frontier of medical research. And so I got concerned and started having player safety conferences. Well, it wasn't all that popular. The players themselves are generally in a state of denial about their health. They don't want to really hear about it.
Yeah.
And the head of the brain health committee, Dr. Pellman, called me a fearmonger in Sports Illustrated,
Mhm.
but um, I've continued to fight on that issue. And again, it's not the most popular thing. A lot of people in the sports world would like it to go away, but I sat there and said, you know what? I didn't go to law school to send a client down the road to dementia without doing something about it.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
how can you just define your fiduciary responsibility as just putting more dollars in their bank book? It's got to be more.
And you're still working on that now. I mean, you have a foundation or a program set up around that. Could tell us about that.
Um, so we continue having these player safety, concussion, brain health seminars. We did two in New Orleans at our last Super Bowl party at the Jazz Museum. And but I thought we need to do more. We need to educate the public about the dangers and risks of traumatic brain injury. And what if I set up a foundation that'll raise money to create more awareness, but will also fund research so we can find solutions? We found a couple positive um, treatments. One's called RTMS, which is magnets against the brain, and the other one is neurofeedback. And actually, through neuroplasticity, can reinvigorate and re-energize a concussed brain. And then can we fund more research? And then can we treat at-risk groups?
Mhm.
So it could be the traumatized LA firefighters, it could be
Mhm.
homeless people, it could be inner city kids, and give them access to brain treatment and help with their mental and intellectual health.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. Not I mean, not just for athletes, but for folks that have
It's not just,
accidents.
as you said, Greg, it's not just an athletic, um,
Yeah.
it's not just an NFL issue. It's college football, high school football, AYSO soccer for girls who hit the ball, um,
Mhm.
hockey, field hockey, and then people fall off bikes and have crashes and trip.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's great to hear you're a big part of that. So how many folks do you represent now? Is it mainly Mahomes and then you do your other things or what, how are you spending your days now?
I've aggregated a series of healing modalities: stem cells, hyperbaric oxygen, something called Bimini, red light, all of which can extend longevity to older people with preventative medicine, but can also be a real help in the athletic world in terms of stimulating energy in critical circumstances, as well as rehabbing quicker from injury. So I work on that. I have 13 uh, clients still in the NFL. I'm going probably to, not ready to announce yet, but do a new agency
Mm.
with some folks. But so I'm active there, but I spend a fair amount of time speaking and writing and uh, trying to make a difference and target different problems in society.
And you do something called the Agent Academy because I'm sure you get asked for internships or for jobs, and a lot of people, men and women, would love to be a sports agent. So what is a sports agency an offshoot of all those requests essentially?
So the Asian Academy is really because you go to business school, law school, or sports management, and they teach you principles, but not root skills. And so we've done about 30 agent academies and trained some number of thousands of people in listening skills, how to recruit, how to negotiate, how to brand and market, how to set up a charitable foundation, um, and we've also done sports career conferences. I'm trying to bring along a new generation of sports professionals because these things apply whether you want to work for a team, a league, a conference, whether you want to work in sports media, sports marketing. Um, all the principles are basically the same. So we're having our next agent academy in July in Las Vegas. You can go to steinbergspeaks.com
Hmm.
and uh, and find out information. But we're trying to pass on and create a specially trained, idealistic generation.
So, do you think an agent today needs to either have a law degree or an MBA background?
It's different in different sports. Football's the most strenuous. You have to have an undergrad degree and a postgrad degree. Um, I'm a lawyer, but you don't necessarily use those skills in sports negotiations. So the answer is no. You could have a master's in anything.
Hmm. Um, we've talked about these points in your lives, like maybe meeting George Burns or Marilyn Monroe and Jimi Hendrix, and then of course all these players and entertainers, presidents. Have you ever been starstruck by anyone in the room?
Sandy Koufax, a pitcher for the Dodgers,
Sure.
was my idol growing up. I haven't met him yet, but I would be starstruck. Um, Other than that, um, the reason I never did entertainment law is I didn't want to know them as people. I didn't want to know that this person was really selfish and everything else. It, uh, um, I mean, President Obama was a striking presence, but
Mm,
like I said, um, and I idolized Martin Luther King and Mahatma Gandhi,
yeah.
but really, we're all people, and I raised my kids to believe they could walk up to the president of the United States, and as long as they were courteous, he might be interested in what they had to say.
Yeah. Well, and to do what you do, it's important probably not to be starstruck if, to be effective at what you do. Um, so what do you think is the parting message you would have for someone? It doesn't have to be someone that wants to get into agency, but this Hollywood script of your life, the ups and the downs, and you're still going strong at what you're doing now. You know, is there one lesson you've learned from all those experiences?
Again, it's resilience. It's about the capacity to face life reverses and come back. It's also, my dad used to have a saying. He said, when you were trying to fix a problem, as small as picking up a piece of trash, as big as racism or climate change, he would say the tendency is to wait for the amorphous they or them to solve the problem. Older people, political figures. And he'd look at me and say, son, you could wait forever. The they is you. So everyone listening can make a positive difference in their own way, in their own time. It could be parenting, it could be whatever they do, but we're all responsible for the conditions on this earth. And collectively, if we um, learn how to light candles rather than curse the darkness, and we can make it a nicer world.
Yeah. You also do the Wednesday Wisdom on Instagram, and I love it, and I wonder what motivated you to do that.
Um, the fact that as you get older, you um, have a variety of insights. I think the most important skill to study is psychology, so you can figure out why people act the way they do and what motivates them, but I would share them with friends, and they said, you you know, maybe I ought to put it on social media, and
Yeah.
I
Well,
hope
it's a great. It-
I hope people can use some of that in their own life, but we don't talk a lot about issues like that.
yeah, it's good. Well, look, I appreciate how open you've been about your life, not just here, but clearly in a lot of interviews you've done, and the way you write about it in your books. And I think a lot of people appreciate that, Leigh. You're still going strong, so serving as an inspiration. I will put in the notes where people can find you on Instagram, on Steinberg Speaks, and we'll watch out if there's a new agency or something coming up because it feels like you're still going.
You'll see soon. Anyway, thank you.
All right. Thanks for being here.
Bye.